Hello, I hope all is well, and today, well, as promised in the last video that was posted on some brutal high gain tones, we're going to be looking at getting like a HM2 style grind into the FM3. Now, first off, good news, I guess, is that HM2 has been added in a recent XFX3 beta firmware. So at some point down the line, that will make its way down to the FM9 and the FM3. But in the meantime, you can try this out to kind of get those tones within your FM3. So obviously, this tone maybe isn't for everyone, but there may be some techniques here, in particularly using a parallel boost or a parallel signal path prior to an amp that might be in use for your setup. So for the bass tone itself, it's really simple. We're just using an amp, cab, and a gate. For the gate, we're using a sidechain style gate, which I will get into in a future video. But for the cab, it's dyna cab, we're using recto straight, condenser mic, and a dynamic mic. And then for the amp itself, we're using a 5153 100 watt red with the following settings. And this is what that sounds like. Now the thing here is that the amp and the cab are totally up to you, and the sort of magic or the thing that we're going to be looking at that really kind of transforms the sound is going to be the parallel boosts that we're going to be using prior to the amp and the cab. And say for parallel effects, you might be used to using a delay in parallel after the amp and the cab, and you set it up like this. So you set up a delay block above or below the actual signal path that's here. And then here in this case, we'll set it to kill dry. And then using the mix, we dial in how much of that we want to be running in parallel to our dry signal that is going through here. Now the thing is, when you're adding, say, a block in series prior to the amp, let's take an example of, say, a drive block, say a fuzz, we'll see here that we have the mix 100%, and that's typically what we'll be using, and then we'll use the level to further boost going into an amp. So what you can do, for example, on, say, the drive pedal, is that you can pull back the mix. So in that case, you can mix in the amount of dirt or overdrive or fuzz in this case that you want alongside your dry signal. By dry signal, we mean a signal that is unaffected by other effects and things like that. So the thing with the HM2, it's not in the drive block just yet. However, what we can do is by using a combination of, say, EQs, we can set something up to get that kind of like EQ curve of like a HM2, along with, say, a drive pedal to get that vibe within the tone. Now, a quick shout out and huge thanks to Domed, who has got loads of, HM2 grind style videos on his channel if you want to check that out. He did a really good video looking at, say, EQ curves of the HM2 to use within the Fractal unit. And I'm using sort of a variant of that here. So what we're going to do first is set up a parallel signal path prior to the amp and the cab. And for that, it's really easy. We're going to select two blocks over here that we're going to add in parallel. So the first block is going to be a simple drive block over here. And for a second block, for a second block, we're going to be using a parametric EQ. You can set this up this way by right-clicking on a block, or if you use Quick Build, you can simply find the block that you want to use and then drag it on to the signal path. And then we're going to hook these up in parallel. So we'll go to the drive block over here in parallel. We'll hook these two together, and then we'll come back down over here to link it back to our main signal path. Now, as you can see by this crazy kind of EQ that's here, that's in essence kind of like the HM2 set to max. So basically when you've got the high and the low and the level all maxed out, these are the settings that you're going to be looking at. I'll paste them on screen if you want to pause to sort of copy them into the block that you're using to make things easier. And for the drive block, we're using a face fuzz to give an extra bit of girth to the tone. So I'll keep the drive block off and we'll first look at the effect of the parametric EQ that's going on here with the initial sound that we had. So as you can hear, it's quite a difference with this extremely aggressive EQ curve. And the cool thing about setting this in parallel is that by using the level here, we can basically mix in the amount of this aggressive EQ curve that we want going into the front of the amp. So here are a few examples of that, and I'll set the level at different kind of points so that you get an idea of what it's doing and how much of that you want for, say, your tone. And so by doing this in parallel, we can easily kind of mix in the amount of that aggression that we want alongside the dry guitar tone that's going into the front of the amp. And we can make it even more kind of aggressive and noisy by adding an extra overdrive, or in my case, we're going to add a fuzz in front of that tone. So alongside the same parallel chain, we've got our drive block, and I've set it up with a face fuzz. And you can basically decide on this depending on what you're wanting to do, but I'll show the blend of all of three of these elements to give you an idea of the kind of tones that you can get out of it. Now, yep, that's a ton of gain, that's a ton of boost and everything going into the front end of the amp. And because we've got this really tight sidechain style gate setup, it's going to clamp down on any of that kind of noise. Now, here's something else I think is really cool to try with this in mind. And I got this from the Garza podcast with Blake Mullins from Disembodied Tyrant. And what he's using is like a combination of like 2 pitch blocks, I believe, to get like a -1 pitch down blended at 50%, and then there's also like an octave up that's in there just afterwards. Now in the FM3 we only have 1 pitch block, however we can use the ring modulator to simulate that kind of effect to get an octave up after that. So for this we're going to be adding say the pitch block over here, and then we'll add the ring modulator just after that, and we'll hook these up in parallel as well. So here what we're going to do is we're going to set up the ring mod to be an octave up while tracking the guitar. For that it's really easy. We'll set it to classic, set pitch tracking to on, and we'll set the frequency multiplier to 2, so it'll be an octave up from whatever note that we're playing. So here's what it sounds with just the ring modulator in parallel, of course, in front of the amp in the cab with an octave up. So yeah, it might be kind of glitchy as well, but I guess it adds some kind of character. In the XFX3, you can add 2 pitch blocks, so you wouldn't have to do something like this, but this is a cool workaround to get an additional octave up, or octave down, if you will, with a different kind of vibe in the FM3. And along to that, we're going to be adding a pitch block that's set to -1. It's in dual chromatic mode, mix at 50%. And here's what that sounds when that's combined together along with that ring mod. Now that sounds really dissonant, and it's basically not to be on all the time, but you can use something like this at specific points, either in the set or recordings or something like that, to add this extra layer of kind of aggression and dissonance. So with all these things added together, along with the HM-2 style block, this is the kind of tone we're getting. So there we go. As said, this is definitely not for everyone, but hopefully gives you some ideas of the sort of tones that you can get out of, say, the Fractal units that are just extremely aggressive and super pushed, which might be applicable to your setup or might be something cool to blend in with different tones that you're working on. I find, for example, using that kind of like parallel setup before an amp a cool way of adding in different effects or a vibe of an effect or filth, we'll put it that way, without really messing too much with the bass guitar tone. And because you've got that kind of parallel mix that you can kind of mess with, you're not destroying too much. You can, of course, do that if you want. In any case, thanks a lot for watching. Hope to see you in the next video. Take care.